My daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eyes during Sunday dinner and said, Jodi, maybe it's time you stopped living with us and went to rent a room somewhere. The room went silent. I waited for my son Ethan to say something, anything, but he just stared down at his plate like I wasn't even there. And in that moment, sitting inside the very house I had once saved from foreclosure with my own retirement money, I realized something devastating. I wasn't family to them anymore. I was a burden they wanted gone. What they didn't know was this: I may have been quiet, but I was not powerless. If you've ever been hurt by someone you loved, I'd really like to hear your story tonight. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if stories about family betrayal and finding your strength speak to your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe. Sometimes sharing these stories reminds us we're not alone. 3 years before Vanessa told me to go rent a room somewhere, I buried my husband on a cold November morning in Columbus, Ohio. Frank Russell had been my husband for 42 years. 42. Sometimes I still couldn't believe a whole lifetime could disappear in a single afternoon inside a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. Frank had always been the steady one, the kind of man who checked the locks twice before bed, who balanced the checkbook every Sunday morning, who still held my hand in grocery store parking lots, even in our 60s. When he died from a sudden stroke, the silence afterward nearly destroyed me. The house felt haunted without him, not haunted by ghosts, haunted by routine. His coffee mug still sitting beside the sink, his reading glasses near the recliner, his old flannel jacket hanging by the back door, because I couldn't bring myself to move it. At first, Ethan called every day. Mom, you eating okay? Mom, you sleeping? Mom, you need anything? I remember thinking maybe Frank had been right about our son after all. Frank used to say Ethan's soft-hearted. He just lets stronger people lead him too much. Back then, I thought he simply meant Ethan hated conflict. I didn't realize how dangerous that weakness could become. About 4 months after the funeral, Ethan invited me to dinner at his house. Vanessa made lemon chicken. Lily showed me her spelling test with a giant red A across the top. The house was loud, warm, alive. Exactly the opposite of mine. At the end of dinner, Ethan leaned back in his chair and said carefully, Mom, have you ever thought about not staying alone anymore? I laughed a little. What's that supposed to mean? He glanced at Vanessa before speaking again. You could stay with us. Vanessa smiled immediately. Too immediately. Oh, Jodi, we'd love that, she said sweetly. Lily would be thrilled. And Lily really was thrilled. She practically climbed into my lap. Please say yes, Grandma. That was the first time I'd laughed in weeks. I should probably admit something here. I didn't move in because I was helpless. I moved in because I was lonely. There's a difference. A painful one. 6 weeks later, I sold my house. Not because I needed money. Frank and I had done well over the years. I'd spent almost 25 years managing bookkeeping for a regional construction company, while Frank ran his own repair business. We weren't rich, but we were careful. Careful people survive hard times. That was Frank's philosophy. When the house sold, I quietly put most of the money into savings and moved into Ethan and Vanessa's place with only the things I truly cared about. My clothes, Frank's watch, family photo albums, a few pieces of furniture, and the cedar chest my father built for me when I was 19. The first few months felt almost peaceful. I helped Lily with homework every afternoon. I packed her lunches. I folded laundry before Vanessa got home from work. Sometimes Ethan would walk into the kitchen after work and smile when he smelled dinner cooking. Smells like childhood in here, he'd say. And for a while that made me happy, needed, useful. Vanessa was polite then. Not warm exactly, but pleasant. She'd thank me for cooking, thank me for picking Lily up from school, thank me for helping with groceries. But little things started changing slowly. So slowly, I almost convinced myself I imagined them. One morning, I walked into the kitchen and found all my coffee supplies gone. The little ceramic sugar bowl Frank bought me in Vermont, my favorite cinnamon creamer, the coffee beans I liked, everything replaced with Vanessa's expensive flavored pods. Oh, she said casually when I asked about it. I reorganized things. The kitchen was getting cluttered. Cluttered. That word stayed with me. A few weeks later, I noticed my chair in the living room had disappeared. Not moved, gone. In its place sat a tall, decorative plant. When I asked Ethan about it, he rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Vanessa's trying to make the room look more modern. Modern. Apparently, modern didn't include a 67-year-old woman reading beside the fireplace. Still, I said nothing, because that's what mothers do sometimes. We shrink ourselves to keep peace inside rooms we helped build. The first moment I truly felt unwelcome happened on a rainy Tuesday evening. Lily and I were baking chocolate chip cookies when Vanessa walked in from work. She stopped in the kitchen doorway and stared at the flour on the counter. Then she sighed. Not a tired sigh, an irritated sigh. Jodi, she said, I just cleaned this kitchen yesterday. I blinked at her. We're making cookies. I know, but it's becoming a lot. There's constantly activity here now. Activity? As if Lily and I were strangers, occupying space instead of family living inside a home. Lily looked down at the bowl quietly. That hurt more than Vanessa's words, because children notice tension long before adults admit it exists. After that, things became more subtle, more calculated. Vanessa started correcting little things constantly. The way I folded towels, the groceries I bought, the thermostat temperature. Once she even criticized how much detergent I used. You know, utilities are expensive now, right? I almost laughed at that one, because I had quietly been paying their electric bill for 6 months. They didn't know I knew Ethan was struggling financially. I'd seen overdue notices accidentally left near the counter. I'd noticed how tense he became whenever the mortgage came up. So every month I transferred money into Ethan's account without embarrassing him. Sometimes $1,500, sometimes $2,000. Once I even paid for Lily's dental work directly. I never told Vanessa. I never wanted gratitude. I only wanted my family safe. But something strange began happening. The more I helped them, the less respected I became. It was like generosity erased my value instead of increasing it. One evening, I overheard Vanessa talking on the phone upstairs. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was bringing folded towels toward the guest bathroom when I heard my name. She's here all the time, Vanessa whispered sharply. It's like having a permanent guest who never leaves. I froze halfway down the hallway. Permanent guest. Not mother, not grandmother. Guest. I stood there holding towels against my chest like a fool while my heart slowly cracked open. Then Vanessa laughed quietly and added something that chilled me even more. She means well, but honestly, Ethan feels guilty about her. That's the only reason she's still here. I waited for Ethan to disagree. I waited to hear my son defend me, but all I heard was silence. That silence hurt worse than anything Vanessa ever said, because cruelty from strangers is painful. Cruelty allowed by your own child is something else entirely. That night, I sat alone in my small downstairs bedroom, staring at a framed photo of Frank. I think you were trying to warn me, I whispered. Outside my door, I could hear Vanessa laughing softly at some television show upstairs. And for the first time since moving in, I had a terrible feeling that I no longer understood the people I was living with, especially my son. The room they moved me into used to be a storage space behind the garage. Vanessa called it more private. That was the word she used while standing in the doorway with her arms crossed and a smile stretched too carefully across her face. We thought you'd be more comfortable down here, Jodi. Comfortable. The room smelled faintly like paint and cardboard boxes. It had one small window facing the driveway and barely enough space for a twin bed and a dresser. I looked past Vanessa toward the upstairs hallway where my original room had been, the bright guest room with floral curtains, the room Ethan himself had prepared for me when I first moved in. The room Lily had helped decorate with little framed family photos. Now Vanessa wanted it for a home office. I remember glancing at Ethan, waiting, hoping. But my son avoided eye contact while pretending to check something on his phone. That silence again. Always silence. Well, I said softly, if it helps. Vanessa clapped her hands once, like the matter had been solved beautifully. Oh, good. I knew you'd understand. Understand what? That I was slowly disappearing from my own family. Over the next few weeks, the rules inside the house began changing one after another. At first, they sounded reasonable, then they became humiliating. Vanessa started insisting on quiet mornings, which meant I couldn't use the blender before 9 a.m. Then she created family dinner nights, except somehow I wasn't always informed when they happened. Twice I walked upstairs and found them already eating. The first time, Ethan looked startled. Oh, Mom, we thought you already ate. I stood there staring at the extra plate sitting on the counter. An empty plate, unused. Vanessa smiled without warmth. There's leftovers if you want some. Leftovers. That word settled into my chest like cold rain. I began eating most meals downstairs alone. Sometimes Lily would sneak down, carrying half her sandwich, or a cookie wrapped in a napkin. I saved this for you, Grandma. She always whispered it like we were hiding from someone. That alone told me more than I wanted to know. Children become quiet when homes stop feeling safe. One Saturday afternoon, I was folding laundry in the living room while Vanessa hosted two women from her yoga class. I wasn't trying to listen to their conversation, but when people think older women are invisible, they stop lowering their voices. One of the women glanced toward me and asked, "So how long is Ethan's mom staying with you guys?" Vanessa laughed lightly. "Oh, honestly, who knows anymore?" The women chuckled politely. Then Vanessa added something that made my hands freeze around one of Lily's little t-shirts. It's hard because once family moves in, they never really leave. Never really leave. I felt my face burn with embarrassment. Not anger. Embarrassment. At 67 years old, after decades of working, saving, raising a family, burying my husband, and helping my son survive more financial disasters than he even knew, I had somehow become a burden people discussed over herbal tea. I quietly gathered the folded clothes and carried them downstairs before they could see tears forming in my eyes. That night, Ethan knocked softly on my door. "Mom," I pretended to be reading. "Come in." He stepped inside awkwardly, hands shoved into his pockets. "You okay?" I almost laughed. That question had become insulting, because clearly I wasn't okay. But he didn't want honesty. He wanted reassurance, the kind that let him sleep peacefully without confronting reality. "I'm fine," I said. He nodded too quickly. "Vanessa's just stressed lately. Work's been rough." I stared at him for a long moment. "You know she humiliates me, right?" His face tightened immediately. "Mom, don't say that." "Then what would you call it?" He sighed heavily. "She's trying to balance everything. Balance everything." Interesting phrase, because somehow the balance always required me becoming smaller, quieter, more invisible. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed his forehead. "You know how Vanessa is." There it was, the sentence that explained his entire personality. "You know how she is," as if cruelty became acceptable when repeated often enough. I looked at my son carefully then, really looked at him. The gray exhaustion under his eyes, the nervous habit of tugging his wedding ring, the way he flinched slightly whenever Vanessa raised her voice upstairs. And suddenly, I remembered something from his childhood. Ethan was 12 years old when a group of boys cornered him near the basketball courts at school. He came home with bruises on his arm and dirt on his shirt. Frank had marched straight to the principal's office the next morning. But afterward, when we asked Ethan why he hadn't fought back or told anyone sooner, he whispered something I never forgot. "I thought if I stayed quiet, they'd stop eventually." My heart sank, because that little boy had grown into a man who still believed silence could save him. Only now the damage was happening inside his own home. A few days later, Vanessa reorganized the kitchen again. This time, she removed almost everything that belonged to me. My baking dishes, my spice rack, Frank's old cast iron skillet. I found them packed inside boxes near the garage. When I asked why, Vanessa smiled tightly. The kitchen was getting overcrowded. Overcrowded. Funny how the house only felt crowded when my existence became visible. I started noticing other things too. Private conversations stopping when I entered rooms. Vanessa lowering her laptop screen whenever I walked past. Ethan looking increasingly anxious whenever finances came up. One evening, while taking trash outside, I accidentally overheard Vanessa arguing with Ethan through the open kitchen window. She's sitting on all that money while we struggle, Vanessa hissed. My breath caught. Ethan answered quietly, "That's not fair." "Oh, really? She sold her house?" "Ethan, where did all that money go? That's Mom's business." "No," Vanessa snapped. "It became our business the moment she moved in here permanently." Permanently. Again that word. Like I was some stain they couldn't scrub out. Then came the sentence that truly frightened me. Vanessa lowered her voice, but I still heard it. "We need to start thinking long-term about the property situation." Property, not family, not relationships. Property. I stood outside in the cold holding a trash bag while my stomach twisted painfully. Because suddenly, things started making sense. The strange questions Vanessa asked lately, the comments about retirement savings, the casual conversations about estate planning, even the way she sometimes studied me when she thought I wasn't looking. Not with affection, with calculation. That night, I couldn't sleep. Rain tapped softly against the tiny basement window while I stared at the ceiling, replaying every conversation from the past year. Around midnight, I heard soft footsteps outside my door, then a tiny knock. Grandma. It was Lily. I opened the door carefully. She stood there clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Can I stay with you for a little?" "Of course, sweetheart." She climbed into bed beside me and rested her head against my shoulder, exactly the way Ethan used to when he was little. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then quietly, almost fearfully, Lily whispered something that chilled me. "Mom gets mad when Dad talks to you too much." I stayed very still. "What do you mean?" Lily picked at the rabbit's ear nervously. "She says you make Dad feel guilty." A sharp ache spread through my chest. Because children always tell the truth, adults try hardest to hide. I kissed the top of Lily's head gently. "You don't have to worry about grown-up problems." But after she fell asleep beside me, I stayed awake until nearly dawn, listening, thinking, remembering Frank's warning years ago. Be careful around people who treat love like ownership, Jodi. At the time, I thought he meant business. I never imagined he might one day mean family. The Sunday dinner that changed everything started with candles. That's the part I remember most clearly. Vanessa had placed white candles down the center of the dining table and folded cloth napkins into neat little triangles, like we were hosting a magazine photo shoot instead of a family meal. She wore a cream-colored sweater dress and kept smoothing invisible wrinkles from it every few minutes. There were 6 guests coming that evening. 2 couples Ethan knew from work, and Vanessa's friend Melissa with her husband. The house smelled like rosemary chicken and garlic bread. Jazz music floated softly through the speakers, while Vanessa rushed around pretending everything in her life was perfect, including me, especially me. "Jodi," she called from the kitchen, "could you maybe stay downstairs until everyone arrives? It's just a little crowded up here while I'm setting things up." I stood there holding Lily's cardigan in my hands. "Oh," I said quietly. "Of course." She smiled too brightly. "Thank you. You're a lifesaver." Lifesaver. Interesting word for someone she treated like unwanted furniture. Downstairs, I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, listening to laughter echo through the ceiling as guests arrived one by one. At one point, I heard Ethan say, "Mom's here too. Not my mother lives with us. Not she's family. Just Mom's here too." Like an afterthought. Lily eventually came downstairs in her little blue dress and grabbed my hand. "Grandma, you're supposed to come eat now." I smiled at her. "You look beautiful." She grinned proudly. Mom curled my hair. When we walked upstairs together, conversation paused briefly. Not completely. Just enough for me to notice. Melissa gave me one of those tight smiles people use when they don't know what to do with older relatives. The men nodded politely. Vanessa walked over immediately. "There you are," she said, kissing the air near my cheek. "Everyone. This is Ethan's mom, Jodi. Ethan's mom, not Jodi. Not family. Just a label attached to someone else." Dinner started pleasantly enough. The men talked football. Melissa discussed vacation plans in Florida. Vanessa kept refilling wine glasses while carefully steering every conversation back toward herself. I mostly stayed quiet. Older women learn that silence makes younger people more comfortable, especially when they've already decided you take up too much space. About halfway through dinner, one of Ethan's coworkers, Mark, I think, looked toward me kindly. "So, Jodi," he asked, "how long have you been staying with Ethan and Vanessa?" It was such a harmless question. Simple, normal. But the moment it landed on the table, I felt Vanessa stiffen beside me. I answered gently, "A little over 2 years now." Mark smiled. "That's nice. Must be good having family close." I saw Vanessa glance quickly toward Melissa. Then she laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, almost casually. But what she said next split my life cleanly into before and after. "Well," she said with a smile, "honestly, we've been trying to convince Jodi it might be time to rent a room somewhere." The entire table froze. Forks stopped moving. Even the jazz music suddenly sounded too loud. At first, I honestly thought maybe I misunderstood her. I looked at Vanessa. She took a sip of wine calmly. Then she continued, "I mean, everyone needs their own independence eventually, right?" My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. I turned slowly toward Ethan, my son, my baby boy, who used to cry if I left him at kindergarten too long, the child I stayed awake with through fevers, the teenager I defended when teachers said he lacked confidence, the grown man whose mortgage I had quietly helped pay for nearly a year. I waited for him to speak, to laugh awkwardly and say, "Vanessa, what are you talking about?" Or, "Mom, don't listen to her." Or even, "That's not funny." Anything. Anything at all. But Ethan just stared at his plate, silent, completely silent. And somehow that silence hurt more than Vanessa's words ever could. Melissa shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Mark cleared his throat. Lily looked confused. I felt heat rush into my face. Not anger, humiliation, pure humiliation. Vanessa gave a little shrug and smiled like she was discussing the weather. "I just think it would be healthier for everybody." Healthier. As if my existence were some kind of disease infecting their home. I set my fork down carefully, because suddenly my hands were shaking. "Well," I whispered, "I didn't realize I was causing such hardship." Vanessa's expression flickered for half a second. Not guilt, annoyance. Like I was making the moment awkward by reacting emotionally. "Oh, Jodi," she said lightly, "don't make it dramatic." Dramatic. That word nearly broke me. Because women like Vanessa always call pain dramatic when it belongs to someone else. I looked at Ethan one last time. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. And in that moment, something inside me quietly changed. Not shattered, not exploded. Changed. Like a door slowly closing forever. I stood from the table. "I think I'm tired," I said softly. Nobody stopped me. Not Ethan, not Vanessa. Nobody. "Only Lily," whispered Grandma in a frightened little voice. I touched her shoulder gently. "It's okay, sweetheart." But it wasn't okay. And deep down, I think she knew that too. I walked down the hallway toward the stairs, leading to my basement room, trying desperately not to cry before I reached the door. As I passed Ethan's office, I heard voices inside. Vanessa's voice, sharp, low. I probably should have kept walking. But then I heard something that stopped me cold. "If she signs the transfer papers, this whole situation finally gets easier." My heartbeat stumbled. "Transfer papers," Ethan answered too quietly for me to hear clearly. Then Vanessa spoke again. "She's emotional tonight. Honestly, this may actually help convince her." I stood frozen in the hallway, every instinct inside me suddenly awake. The office door wasn't fully closed. Through the narrow gap, I saw papers spread across Ethan's desk, folders, documents, a yellow legal pad, and right on top, a copy of my signature. My blood ran cold. I stepped back immediately before they could notice me. My mind raced so fast I could barely think straight. Transfer papers, signature, convince her. For the first time, real fear slipped beneath my humiliation. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about being unwanted anymore. It was about something else, something bigger. I made it downstairs somehow, though I barely remember walking. Once inside my room, I locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. Upstairs, I could still hear faint laughter from dinner resuming. Like my humiliation had simply become another uncomfortable moment people preferred to move past quickly. Tears finally came then. Hot. Silent. I pressed both hands over my mouth so no one would hear me crying. Not because I was ashamed, but because I finally understood something terrifying. Vanessa didn't just want me out of the house. She wanted something from me first. And my son. My son was helping her. Or worse. He was too weak to stop her. Around midnight, I heard Ethan outside my door. He knocked softly. Mom. I stayed completely silent. After a long pause, he sighed quietly from the other side. Then I heard his footsteps walk away. And for the very first time in my life, I realized I no longer trusted my own child. I barely slept after that dinner. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan staring down at his plate while Vanessa told me to leave like I was some stranger overstaying her welcome. But worse than the humiliation was what I'd overheard afterward. Transfer papers, my signature. Something about convincing me. By 6 in the morning, I was already awake, sitting on the edge of my bed in the dim basement light with Frank's old robe wrapped around my shoulders. The house upstairs was still quiet. For a long moment, I simply listened. The refrigerator humming faintly, pipes clicking inside the walls, a distant car driving through wet streets outside. Ordinary sounds. But nothing about my life felt ordinary anymore. I kept replaying Vanessa's exact tone in my mind. Not emotional, not impulsive, planned. That was what frightened me most. This hadn't been some angry outburst at dinner. She had already been thinking ahead, planning, calculating. And somehow Ethan had become part of it, or maybe he'd simply allowed it to happen. I wasn't sure which possibility hurt more. Around 7:30, I heard Lily getting ready for school upstairs. A few minutes later, tiny footsteps hurried down the basement stairs. She knocked softly. Grandma. I opened the door immediately. Lily wrapped her arms around my waist before I could say anything. I'm sorry about last night. My throat tightened. Oh, sweetheart. None of that was your fault. She looked up at me with worried eyes that were far too old for 11 years old. Mom was really mean. Children always say the truth plainly. No careful wording, no pretending, just honesty. I brushed a strand of hair behind her ear gently. Sometimes grown-ups say things they regret, but even as I said it, I realized something painful. Vanessa didn't regret it at all. Lily hesitated before whispering, "Are you really leaving?" I forced a smile. "I don't know yet." She hugged me again before running upstairs when Vanessa called her name sharply. A few minutes later, the front door slammed and silence returned. I waited another hour before finally going upstairs. Ethan had already left for work too. Only Vanessa remained home. I found her in the kitchen drinking coffee while scrolling through her phone. She looked up casually when I entered. Morning. As if she hadn't publicly humiliated me 12 hours earlier. Morning, I replied quietly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Vanessa sighed dramatically. Look about last night. I waited. But not for an apology. Somehow I already knew better. I probably could have worded things more gently, she said. But honestly, Jodi, this living arrangement just isn't sustainable forever. Sustainable. Another cold corporate word replacing human feeling. I leaned against the counter carefully. Did Ethan know you planned to say that Vanessa stirred her coffee slowly? We've talked about boundaries for months. Boundaries. Interesting choice of language. from a woman living inside a house she didn't actually own. I studied her face carefully then. Beautiful, controlled, perfect makeup already done before 8 in the morning. But underneath that polished exterior, I suddenly noticed something else: impatience. Vanessa wasn't just tired of me. She was frustrated something hadn't happened yet, and I had a terrible feeling I knew what it was. "I heard you mention transfer papers last night," I said quietly. For the first time since I walked into the kitchen, Vanessa's expression changed. Only briefly. But I caught it. A flash of surprise, then immediate recovery. "Oh," she said lightly. That, that. She shrugged casually. "Ethan's been trying to organize long-term planning stuff. Emergency contacts, estate things. You know how complicated paperwork gets when people get older. People get older. Not you. People." As if aging itself made me less capable. I stared at her. "What exactly are you planning to transfer?" Vanessa smiled thinly. "You seem upset this morning. Maybe this isn't the best time for financial conversations." There it was again, that careful redirection, that subtle suggestion I was emotional rather than observant. Frank used to warn me about people like that. "Pay attention to anyone who tries to make you doubt your own instincts," he'd say. I suddenly missed my husband so fiercely, it physically hurt. Without another word, I walked away from the kitchen and headed downstairs. My hands trembled as I unlocked the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Inside were old files, tax documents, insurance records, property papers, bank information. Frank believed in keeping copies of everything. Paper trails save lives, he always joked. For the next hour, I carefully sorted through folders until I found the house documents. Then I froze. The folder had clearly been disturbed. Not dramatically. Not enough for most people to notice. But I noticed immediately. The pages were no longer in Frank's exact order. One paper had a tiny folded corner I knew I hadn't left there. And worst of all, there was a faint photocopy shadow across one page. Someone had copied these documents. A cold heaviness settled into my stomach. I sat down slowly on the bed and opened the property file fully. There it was. The truth. The house Ethan and Vanessa lived in, the same house where I was now treated like an unwanted guest, was legally mine. Not Ethan's. Mine. 3 years earlier, Ethan and Vanessa had nearly lost everything after Ethan's failed business investment. They were drowning in debt, mortgage payments behind, credit cards maxed out, Vanessa panicking constantly. Frank and I had stepped in quietly. We paid off the overdue balance and refinanced the property under my name to stop foreclosure proceedings. Frank insisted on structuring it carefully. "She needs protection. If something ever goes wrong," he'd told the attorney. At the time, Ethan cried and hugged us both. "I'll pay you back," he promised. But Frank had just smiled sadly. "No, son. Just take care of your mother someday." I closed my eyes tightly. God. Frank knew. Maybe not specifics, but he understood weakness in people better than I ever did. Suddenly, another memory surfaced. About 6 months earlier, Vanessa had casually asked where I kept important paperwork. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now every conversation felt different, sharper, darker. I started checking more files carefully. Bank statements, retirement accounts, insurance forms. Then I found something else disturbing. Several tax documents had been slightly misaligned, like someone photographed them and hurriedly shoved them back. My breathing became shallow. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was investigation. Someone had been gathering information about my finances without permission. I immediately locked everything back inside the cedar chest. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Diane Mercer, Frank's old attorney. She answered on the third ring. "Jodi, oh my goodness, it's been a while." Hearing her voice almost made me cry from relief. "Diane?" I whispered. "I think something's wrong." There was a pause. Then her tone changed instantly. "Tell me everything." So I did. The dinner, the transfer papers, the copied documents, Vanessa's behavior, Ethan's silence. When I finished, Diane stayed quiet for several seconds. Finally, she asked one careful question. Jodi, has anyone recently suggested you're struggling to manage on your own? A chill slid down my spine. I thought about little comments Vanessa made lately. You forget things sometimes. You get confused easily. Let me handle that paperwork for you. My heart started pounding harder. Yes, I whispered. Diane exhaled slowly. I need you to listen carefully. Do not sign anything. Do not discuss finances with them further. And bring every document you have to my office tomorrow morning. Fear rose inside me fully then. Not embarrassment, not sadness. Fear. What do you think they're doing? I asked shakily. Diane's voice became very calm. I don't know yet, she said, but I think someone may be trying to position you as dependent. Dependent. That word hit me like ice water, because suddenly everything made horrifying sense. The comments about aging, the push for family agreements, the slow isolation, the attempts to make me feel powerless inside my own home. I looked around the tiny basement room they'd moved me into, and for the first time since Frank died, I truly felt unsafe. The next morning, I told Vanessa I had a doctor's appointment. I hated lying. But something inside me had shifted after my conversation with Diane Mercer. For weeks, maybe even months, I'd been reacting emotionally to everything happening around me, trying to understand, trying to preserve peace, trying to avoid believing the worst about my own son. But Diane's words kept echoing in my mind. Someone may be trying to position you as dependent. That wasn't family tension anymore. That was strategy. And strategy required caution. Vanessa barely looked up from her laptop when I mentioned the appointment. Okay, she said absently. Do you need Ethan to drive you? No, I'll take my own car. That finally got her attention. You still feel comfortable driving downtown alone? The question sounded innocent, but now I heard everything differently. I smiled politely. I've been driving longer than you've been alive, Vanessa. Her lips tightened for just a second. Then the fake smile returned. Well, just be careful. Careful. Another word that suddenly sounded loaded. The drive to Diane's office took about 30 minutes. Rain streaked across the windshield, while old memories crowded my mind. Frank and I had sat inside that same office nearly 10 years earlier, back when Ethan's financial problems first spiraled out of control. I still remembered the shame on Ethan's face when he admitted he couldn't save the house. Vanessa had cried that day, real tears. Or at least they looked real at the time. We'll lose everything, she'd whispered. Frank had stayed calm, always calm. He and Diane worked out the refinancing plan carefully. Frank insisted the property remain under my legal ownership because our retirement savings carried most of the financial risk. At the time, Ethan hugged us both so tightly, I thought he truly understood the sacrifice we were making. Now I wondered if Vanessa ever intended to respect that arrangement permanently. Diane greeted me personally when I arrived. She was in her early 70s, now silver-haired and elegant, with the same sharp eyes that always made people straighten their posture instinctively. The moment she saw my face, her expression softened. Oh, Jodi, that nearly broke me. Not because of pity, because kindness feels overwhelming once you've lived too long without it. Inside her office, I spread every document across the conference table. Property records, tax returns, insurance files, copies of mortgage payments, bank transfers. Diane examined everything carefully for nearly 40 minutes while I sat twisting tissues nervously in my lap. Finally, she leaned back slowly. Well, she said quietly, your instincts were absolutely correct. Cold fear slid through me again. What does that mean? Diane folded her hands carefully. It means someone has been preparing for more than a simple conversation about living arrangements. My stomach tightened. She pointed towards several documents. These copies weren't casually made, Jodi. Someone specifically reviewed ownership records, asset distribution, and account structures. I swallowed hard. Can they do anything legally? Not without your cooperation, Diane replied. At least not directly. Not directly. That phrase frightened me immediately. What does that mean? Diane hesitated before answering. Tell me honestly. Has Vanessa or Ethan started making comments about your memory, your confusion, your ability to manage finances? I stared at her, then slowly nodded. Diane sighed softly. That concerns me. The room suddenly felt colder. She opened a folder and slid several blank legal templates toward me. These are standard guardianship and financial control petitions. Families sometimes pursue them when elderly relatives become cognitively impaired. My chest tightened painfully. They think I'm incompetent? I don't know if Ethan fully understands what's happening, Diane said carefully, but I suspect Vanessa may be laying groundwork. Groundwork. The word made me feel physically sick. I thought about all the subtle comments lately. You forgot where you put your keys. You seem overwhelmed sometimes. Maybe I should help organize your finances? I suddenly realized those remarks weren't random. They were documentation, narrative building, a story being slowly constructed around me. And worst of all, I had started doubting myself because of it. Diane studied me closely. Jodi, I need to ask something difficult. Has Ethan directly participated in any financial discussions recently? I hesitated, then remembered the papers on his desk. He signed something, I whispered. I don't know what. Diane nodded grimly. That's what I was afraid of. Fear rose higher inside me. Do you think Ethan's trying to steal from me? The question itself shattered something in my heart, because no mother wants to ask that aloud. Diane answered carefully. I think Ethan is weak, and weak people sometimes become dangerous when stronger personalities guide them. Frank had said nearly the exact same thing years ago. My eyes burned suddenly. He wasn't raised this way. No, Diane agreed softly, but shame changes people. That word caught my attention immediately. Shame. Diane opened another file. Jodi, Ethan's financial situation is much worse than you realize. I stared at her. What do you mean? She looked reluctant to continue, but finally spoke. The mortgage payments you helped with bought them time, not stability. I felt dizzy. Diane continued carefully. There are additional debts, credit consolidation loans, missed payments, maxed business credit accounts. My heart sank deeper with every sentence. All this time, I whispered. She nodded. They've been drowning financially for years. Suddenly, everything made horrifying sense. Vanessa's obsession with property, the urgency, the manipulation, the resentment toward me keeping ownership control. I wasn't just inconvenient. I was standing between them and financial collapse. I covered my mouth with trembling fingers. Oh my God. Diane leaned forward gently. Listen to me carefully. None of this excuses what's happening, but desperation often accelerates bad character. I sat silently for a long moment. Then another terrible thought struck me. Does Ethan know the house legally belongs to me? Yes, Diane answered immediately. He absolutely knows. That hurt more than everything else combined, because it destroyed the last comforting lie I'd been holding on to. I wanted to believe Ethan was confused, manipulated, unaware. But he knew. Maybe not every detail, maybe not every consequence, but he knew enough. Tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. I don't understand how we got here. Diane's face softened deeply. You loved him too completely. That sentence stayed with me, because mothers like me confuse sacrifice with protection. We solve problems quietly, pay bills secretly, absorb emotional damage silently, and sometimes we accidentally teach our children that we'll survive anything they do to us. Diane reached across the table and touched my hand gently. Jodi, I need you to start protecting yourself now, emotionally and legally. I nodded shakily. What do I do? First, don't confront them yet. That surprised me. You don't think I should? No, not until we fully understand what documents exist and how far this situation has progressed. She paused. And frankly, Vanessa sounds manipulative enough to turn confrontation against you. I hated how true that sounded. Diane continued outlining steps carefully. I needed copies of all financial communications, records of my contributions, bank transfers, messages, anything showing I remain mentally competent and financially independent. Then she said something that truly chilled me. From this point forward, assume every interaction may matter legally someday, legally. The word made my own family suddenly feel like strangers. Before I left, Diane handed me a business card with her private number written on the back. If anything escalates even emotionally, you call me immediately. I nodded and gathered my papers slowly. At the office door, I stopped suddenly. Diane, yes. My voice cracked. Do you think my son loves me? The question hung painfully between us. Diane's expression filled with sadness. I think Ethan loves you, she said carefully, but I also think he's spent years choosing comfort over courage. Comfort over courage. That described him perfectly. And maybe that was the real tragedy. Not evil, not hatred, weakness. I drove home slowly afterward, but when I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something strange immediately. Vanessa was standing at the front window watching for me. The moment our eyes met through the glass, she smiled. And for the first time, that smile genuinely frightened me. After my meeting with Diane Mercer, I stopped seeing my home the same way. Every room suddenly felt staged. Every conversation sounded rehearsed. And every smile from Vanessa carried calculation underneath it. The strangest part was that outwardly, nothing dramatic changed. Nobody screamed. Nobody threatened me directly. That's how manipulation survives inside families, quietly, politely, like poison dissolved into tea. When I walked into the kitchen after returning from Diane's office, Vanessa greeted me with cheerful energy that immediately made my skin crawl. How'd the appointment go? I set my purse down carefully. Fine. That's good. She stirred pasta sauce while watching me too closely. You were gone a while. I opened the refrigerator slowly. Traffic downtown was awful. That little sound. So small, but filled with suspicion. For the rest of the evening, I became hyper-aware of everything around me. Vanessa asking casual questions that suddenly didn't feel casual anymore. Did the doctor say your blood pressure's okay? You still remembering to take your vitamins? You seemed forgetful earlier this week. Forgetful. There it was again. That narrative Diane warned me about. I answered calmly each time, careful not to react emotionally. Because now I understood something important. Vanessa wanted emotional reactions. She wanted me upset, confused, overwhelmed, maybe even angry enough to look unstable. So instead, I smiled, quietly, politely, and I watched. That night, after everyone went to sleep, I began gathering evidence. The very idea made me feel sick. What kind of mother secretly documents her own son? But Diane's voice stayed in my head. Protect yourself emotionally and legally. So I started with finances. I pulled old bank records from my cedar chest and spread them carefully across the bed. Transfer after transfer. Mortgage assistance, utility payments, credit card bailouts, tuition support for Lily's private school, car repairs, medical bills. Over nearly 3 years, I had quietly poured tens of thousands of dollars into that household. Not loans, not investments, love. That was the tragic part. Every dollar came from love, and somehow love had turned me into prey. I began making copies of everything: dates, amounts, account numbers. Then I started writing notes beside them. Paid during Ethan's unemployment period. Covered Vanessa's emergency dental surgery. Electric bill overdue notice. By midnight, my hands ached from organizing paperwork. But strangely, I also felt calmer than I had in months, because facts cut through emotional fog. And facts told a very different story from the one Vanessa wanted people to believe. I wasn't dependent. They were. The next few days became a strange performance. Vanessa continued pretending nothing serious had happened at dinner. Too normal, almost aggressively normal. She'd smile brightly in front of Ethan, ask if I wanted coffee, offer me salad at dinner. But underneath everything, tension vibrated constantly, like electrical wires hidden inside walls. I noticed other things too once I started paying closer attention. Vanessa frequently checked the mailbox before anyone else. She became protective of Ethan's office. And twice, I caught her standing outside the basement stairs, listening before walking down. One afternoon, Lily came downstairs after school while I was sorting receipts. "What are you doing, Grandma?" I quickly covered the papers. "Just organizing things." She sat beside me on the bed quietly. Then, after a long pause, she whispered something unexpected. "Mom was looking at your bank stuff." My heartbeat jumped. I kept my voice calm. "What do you mean?" Lily twisted her fingers nervously. "The other night, on Dad's laptop." Cold spread through my chest. "What exactly did you see?" "She had one of your papers open." Lily frowned, trying to remember, and she said something about accounts. I stayed very still. Children sometimes reveal truths adults accidentally overlook. "Did your dad say anything?" Lily shrugged sadly. "He just looked tired." That answer hurt almost more than anything else, because it sounded exactly like Ethan. Not evil, not aggressive, just weak enough to let terrible things happen around him. Lily looked up at me carefully. "Grandma, are you in trouble?" My eyes burned instantly. "No, sweetheart." But she kept staring at me. "Children know when adults lie gently." "She says you can't handle stuff anymore," Lily whispered. There it was, the story, already reaching the child. I forced myself not to cry. Instead, I took Lily's hands carefully. "Listen to me very closely. I am absolutely capable of taking care of myself." "Okay," she nodded immediately. "I know. God." That almost broke me right there, because the only person inside that house who seemed to see me clearly anymore was 11 years old. A few days later, I made another disturbing discovery. I came downstairs after showering and found my cedar chest slightly open, only by an inch. Most people wouldn't have noticed, but I always locked it carefully. Always. My stomach tightened immediately. I crossed the room slowly and opened it. The folders inside looked mostly untouched. Mostly. But one envelope had shifted position, and my property documents no longer sat exactly where I'd left them. Someone had gone through my things while I was upstairs. Fear prickled across my skin. Real fear now. Not hurt feelings. Not family conflict. Violation. I immediately took photos of the chest and its contents with my phone before reorganizing everything carefully. Then I called Diane. She opened the chest, I whispered. Diane's voice turned sharp instantly. "Are you certain?" "Yes." "Did you confront anyone?" "No." "Good." I hated how necessary that word felt. Good. As if surviving inside my own family required strategy now. Diane lowered her voice slightly. "Jodi, from this moment forward, assume Vanessa is actively gathering information." My chest tightened harder. "What should I do?" "Keep documenting everything, and move your most important records somewhere safe." That night, after everyone slept, I quietly packed essential documents into a plain tote bag. Property records, bank statements, Frank's will, copies of transfers, insurance information. 42 years of careful life building reduced to paper evidence hidden beneath sweaters. As I zipped the bag closed, I suddenly remembered something Frank used to say during storms. Preparation isn't paranoia. At the time, I thought he meant weather emergencies. Now I understood he meant people too. The next morning, something happened that chilled me even further. I walked into the kitchen and froze when I heard Vanessa speaking softly on the phone. "No, not yet," she whispered. "She's still suspicious." I stopped moving immediately. Vanessa continued pacing slowly near the sink. "I know, but Ethan's nervous now." Silence. Then, "No, I don't think she's talked to anybody yet." My blood turned cold. Anybody. Meaning who? A lawyer. A financial advisor? Someone else. Then Vanessa laughed quietly. She's emotional. That actually helps us. Us. The word echoed painfully in my head. Not me, not family, us against her. Before I could hear more, the floor creaked beneath my foot. Vanessa spun around instantly. For half a second, real panic flashed across her face. Then the mask returned. "Oh," she said brightly, "you scared me." I forced myself to smile. "Sorry." She ended the call quickly and slipped her phone into her pocket. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. And in that silence, I finally understood something terrifying. Vanessa no longer saw me as Ethan's mother. She saw me as an obstacle, a problem to solve, and suddenly I realized something else too. People become most dangerous when they think they're close to winning. 3 days after I overheard Vanessa's phone call, she finally made her move. It happened on a Thursday evening. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows while Ethan sat at the table, pretending to read emails on his laptop. Lily was upstairs doing homework, and Vanessa walked into the room carrying a blue folder. Even before she spoke, I knew. That strange calm settled over me immediately. The kind that comes right before a car accident. Jodi, Vanessa said brightly, "Can we talk for a minute?" I looked up from my tea. Of course. She placed the folder carefully on the kitchen table and sat across from me with the expression people use when they're trying very hard to appear reasonable. Ethan still wouldn't look at me. That alone told me everything. Vanessa folded her hands together. "So, Ethan and I have been discussing ways to simplify things for the future." Simplify. Always these soft little words, hiding sharp intentions underneath. I stayed quiet. Vanessa slid the folder toward me. "It's just a family agreement." Family agreement. The phrase sounded harmless enough, like something involving emergency contacts or medical preferences. But Diane's warning echoed immediately inside my mind. Do not sign anything. I opened the folder slowly. Inside sat several neatly prepared legal documents. Far too neatly prepared. My pulse slowed strangely as I scanned the first page. Temporary Property Administration, Shared Financial Authority, Residential Continuity Protection. The language was intentionally confusing, designed to exhaust older eyes, but Vanessa had made one crucial mistake. She assumed I didn't understand financial paperwork. She forgot I spent 25 years managing corporate accounting contracts. I kept my expression calm while reading carefully, and the deeper I read, the colder I became. Because this wasn't a family agreement. This was a transfer structure, not fully immediate, but gradual. The documents would allow Ethan partial authority over property decisions and financial management in the event of cognitive decline or diminished independent capacity. There it was, the narrative, officially written into legal language. I looked up slowly. What exactly is this supposed to accomplish? Vanessa leaned forward sympathetically. It's honestly just protection, Jodi. Protection. God manipulators loved that word. She continued smoothly. We're all getting older. Things happen unexpectedly. This just makes sure Ethan can help manage things if you ever become overwhelmed. I glanced toward my son. He still avoided my eyes. "Ethan," I asked quietly. He swallowed hard. "It's not a big deal, Mom. Not a big deal." My chest tightened painfully, because buried beneath that sentence was an entire lifetime of cowardice. Vanessa smiled gently, like a nurse comforting a difficult patient. "We're thinking long-term here, that's all." I flipped another page, and there it was, the real target. A clause regarding property transition rights tied to shared family residence stability. In plain English, control of the house. Not immediately, but eventually, gradually, legally. Exactly the kind of slow manipulation Diane warned me about. I closed the folder carefully. Inside rage was beginning to rise for the first time. Not loud rage, cold rage, the dangerous kind. But I forced myself to remain calm, because Vanessa expected emotion, and I was done giving her advantages. So I said softly, You think I can't manage my own affairs anymore? Vanessa's eyes widened theatrically. Oh my goodness, no. That's not what I'm saying at all. But it absolutely was. Ethan finally spoke quietly. Mom, we're just trying to make things easier down the road. I looked directly at him. For whose silence? Vanessa stepped in immediately. This isn't about conflict. Then why did it feel like a trap? I leaned back slowly. You've put a lot of work into these documents. Vanessa smiled carefully. Well, planning matters. Planning? Yes. I was starting to understand exactly how much planning had been happening behind my back. I pretended to study the pages again. Then I asked the question Diane specifically told me to ask. Who prepared these? Vanessa hesitated just slightly. A family legal service online. Lie. I knew it instantly. These documents were too tailored, too specific. Someone had helped her. I nodded slowly as if considering everything seriously. And for the first time since all this began, I decided to act weak. It felt humiliating, but necessary. I sighed softly and rubbed my forehead. There's just so much legal wording. Vanessa visibly relaxed. Like a hunter realizing injured prey was slowing down? I know, she said sweetly. It's confusing. Confusing. I nearly laughed. Instead, I looked uncertain on purpose. So this doesn't mean I'd lose anything. Ethan looked miserable. Vanessa answered immediately. Of course not. Another lie. I already knew exactly what the clauses meant, but something important happened in that moment. Vanessa underestimated me completely, and people reveal themselves fastest once they believe they've won. I set the papers down carefully. I'd like time to think about it. Vanessa's smile flickered slightly. Oh, there's no rush, right? Her eyes shifted briefly toward Ethan, then back to me. Well, some things are time sensitive. Interesting. What things? The housing market, she answered quickly. Interest rates. Future planning. There it was again. Housing. Property. Always circling back to the same thing. I nodded slowly. I understand. Vanessa studied my face closely, trying to determine whether I suspected more than I should. So I gave her exactly what she wanted to see. Confusion, hesitation, fear. I even let my voice shake slightly. I just never imagined getting older would feel so complicated. And suddenly, Vanessa softened completely. Not with compassion, with confidence. Oh, Jodi, she said gently, touching my hand, that's why family helps each other. I almost pulled away, because her fingers felt cold against mine. Ethan finally closed his laptop. You don't have to decide tonight, Mom. Mom. Funny how he only sounded affectionate when he needed something. I stood slowly. I think I'm tired. Vanessa smiled again. Take your time. But I noticed something very important as I carried the folder downstairs. She looked relieved. Not hopeful. Relieved. Like she believed the hardest part was already over. Inside my basement room, I immediately locked the door. Then I photographed every single page and emailed copies directly to Diane Mercer. My hands shook the entire time. Not because I was confused anymore, because now I knew for certain. This wasn't misunderstanding. This wasn't family stress. This was deliberate, calculated, and terrifyingly patient. About 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Diane. I answered immediately. Well, I whispered. Her voice came sharp and furious. Do not sign a single thing. I won't. These documents are extremely dangerous, Jodi. A chill spread through me. How dangerous they create legal pathways for Ethan to assume property authority under subjective cognitive concerns. I closed my eyes. So I was right. Yes, Diane said bluntly. And frankly, the wording suggests professional guidance, meaning Vanessa had help. That thought terrified me more than anything else. Diane continued. You did the right thing pretending uncertainty. I sat down slowly on the bed. She thinks I'm weak. Good, Diane replied immediately. Let her. I frowned. What people make mistakes when they underestimate others. I thought about Vanessa's expression upstairs, that tiny flash of satisfaction, and suddenly I understood. She believed she was close, very close, which meant she'd probably get careless. Diane lowered her voice. Jodi, from this point forward, document everything. Every conversation, every request, every financial discussion. I will. Then she paused. And one more thing. What? If Vanessa becomes more aggressive, soon don't be surprised. Fear curled inside my stomach again. Why? Because people pushing this hard financially are usually desperate. Desperate. I looked around my tiny basement room slowly. The cramped walls, the narrow bed, the boxes stacked near the ceiling. And for the first time, a realization hit me with brutal clarity. I wasn't living there because they loved me anymore. I was living there because Vanessa needed access to my money, my property, my vulnerability. And suddenly, I understood something else too. The moment she realized I might resist, things inside that house were going to get much worse. I left the house on a Monday morning just after sunrise. Vanessa stood near the kitchen island holding a coffee mug while I carried my suitcase toward the front door. She tried to look concerned. That was the remarkable thing about her. Even cruelty had presentation. Are you sure this is necessary? She asked gently. Necessary. As if this had been my decision freely made instead of slowly engineered over months. I adjusted my grip on the suitcase handle. I think some space will be good for everyone. Vanessa lowered her eyes, carefully pretending sadness. Well, we only ever wanted what was best for you. The lie sat between us like smoke. Ethan stood near the doorway, looking exhausted and pale. He hadn't slept much the previous night. I could tell immediately. His eyes kept drifting toward my suitcase and then away again, like he couldn't bear to look directly at what he'd allowed to happen. Lily clung to me so tightly before school. That morning I thought my heart might break completely. Please don't go, Grandma. I kissed the top of her head gently. I'm not disappearing, sweetheart. Tears filled her eyes immediately. Then why do you have to leave children? Always ask the question adults avoid. I glanced toward Ethan. He still said nothing. Finally, Vanessa stepped in smoothly. Grandma just needs a little more independence right now. Independence. Funny word considering I'd been independent my entire life until they started trying to convince me otherwise. Lily looked confused. But Grandma takes care of everybody. God. That almost shattered me right there. Vanessa's smile tightened instantly. Go grab your backpack, honey. You'll miss the bus. After Lily left the room, silence settled heavily across the kitchen. I looked slowly at Ethan. This is really what you want. His face twisted painfully. Mom, but he couldn't finish the sentence. Because weak people often mistake guilt for love, and guilt without action changes nothing. I nodded quietly. That's what I thought. Then I walked out the front door, carrying the last pieces of dignity I still had left. The small room I rented sat above an old bait and tackle shop near Lake Darby, about 20 minutes outside Columbus. It wasn't glamorous. The carpet smelled faintly of dust and old wood. The kitchenette barely fit two people standing side by side. But the moment I stepped inside, something strange happened. I could breathe again. No listening for whispered conversations. No watching Vanessa study me across dinner tables. No pretending not to notice the manipulations surrounding me constantly. For the first time in months, silence felt peaceful instead of threatening. I set my suitcase beside the bed and stood near the window overlooking the lake. Gray morning light shimmered across the water. And suddenly, I burst into tears. Not soft tears, violent ones. The kind your body stores for months because survival requires numbness first. I cried for Frank, for Ethan, for the family I thought I still had, and most painfully, for the woman I used to be before I started shrinking myself to stay welcome inside someone else's house. Around noon, Diane called. How are you holding up? I laughed bitterly through lingering tears. I rented a room above a fishing store at 67 years old. And yet, Diane said gently, "You sound stronger already." That surprised me. But she was right. Even through the heartbreak, something inside me felt clearer now, sharper, because distance reveals truth. And far away from Vanessa's constant emotional pressure, I could finally think again. Diane updated me carefully. "You leaving voluntarily actually helps us." I sat down slowly on the small couch. How? It destroys any future argument that you're financially or physically dependent on them. A strange calm settled through me. All this time, Vanessa wanted to create a picture of helplessness. But now I was living independently, managing my own affairs, paying my own rent, driving myself, handling everything. Legally, that mattered. "What happens next?" I asked quietly. Diane paused. "That depends on how desperate Vanessa becomes." The answer chilled me more than it should have, because deep down, I already knew. Vanessa wasn't finished, not even close. That evening, Ethan called for the first time since I left. I stared at the phone for nearly a minute before answering. "Hi, Mom." His voice sounded small somehow, smaller than I remembered. "Hi." Silence stretched painfully between us. Then finally he said, "How's the room?" "The room?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm sorry." Just polite conversation floating on top of emotional wreckage. "It's fine," I answered. Another silence. Then, "Lily misses you." I closed my eyes briefly. "I miss her too." I waited. Part of me still hoped he'd finally say it. The truth. Any truth. But instead he whispered, "Vanessa feels terrible about how things happened." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was insulting. Does she thinks things just got emotional. Emotional. There was that word again. As if humiliation, manipulation, and financial coercion were simply misunderstandings caused by feelings. I kept my voice calm. "Ethan, did you know what those papers actually meant?" He went silent immediately. Too silent. And suddenly, I had my answer. "You did know," I whispered. "Mom, it wasn't like that." "Then explain it to me." His breathing grew uneven. We were trying to plan ahead. "No," I said quietly. "Vanessa was planning ahead. You were hiding behind her." That hit him hard. I could hear it. But truth usually does. Finally, he whispered something that made my chest ache. "You don't understand how bad things got financially." There it was. The real fear underneath everything. Money, debt, desperation. I stared out the window at the darkening lake. How bad he didn't answer directly. They were threatening lawsuits. My stomach tightened. What lawsuits? Business stuff. Loans, credit accounts. I closed my eyes slowly. Frank had been right all along. Ethan wasn't malicious. He was drowning. And drowning people sometimes grab whoever is closest without caring who they pull underwater. "Mom," Ethan whispered shakily, "I never wanted you hurt." The tragedy was, I believed him. That was the worst part. Because Ethan's weakness hurt more than hatred ever could. Hatred is simple. Cowardice destroys people slowly. I need time, I told him quietly. Then I ended the call before he could say anything else. 2 days later, something happened that confirmed my fears completely. I received a voicemail from Vanessa. Not emotional, not apologetic, businesslike. "Hi, Jodi. Just checking in. Also, when you have time, we should really finish discussing the family paperwork situation. Some financial opportunities are time sensitive right now. Financial opportunities." My blood ran cold listening to it. Even after I moved out, even after everything, she still cared about the paperwork. Not reconciliation, not family, the documents. I forwarded the voicemail directly to Diane. She called me 10 minutes later. "Jodi," she said sharply, "I think Vanessa's situation is deteriorating faster than we realized." Fear curled in my stomach again. What does that mean? It means pressure creates mistakes, and desperate people speed up. I walked slowly toward the lake window. Outside, wind rippled across dark water beneath heavy clouds. For months, I thought leaving the house would end this nightmare. But standing there alone in that tiny rented room, I finally understood the truth. Leaving the house hadn't ended anything. It had only changed the battlefield. And somewhere across town, Vanessa was becoming increasingly desperate to get control before everything collapsed around her. 3 weeks after I moved out, Ethan showed up at my rented room unexpectedly. It was nearly 7 in the evening. Rain hammered against the lake outside while I sat at the tiny kitchenette table, balancing my checkbook out of habit more than necessity. When I heard the knock, my stomach tightened immediately. Not fear, exhaustion. Because betrayal changes even familiar voices into emotional labor. I opened the door slowly. Ethan stood there soaked from the rain, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow with exhaustion. For one painful second, he looked 12 years old again, like the little boy who used to come home after bullies cornered him at school. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I hesitated, then stepped aside. The room suddenly felt impossibly small with him inside it. Ethan looked around awkwardly. The narrow bed, the tiny lamp near the window, the secondhand coffee maker humming softly beside the sink. And I watched shame creep slowly across his face, because now he could finally see what his silence had reduced me to. Not poverty, not helplessness, loneliness. He rubbed his hands together nervously. "This place is okay." I almost smiled at the terrible attempt. "It's clean," I said simply. He nodded. Rain pounded harder outside. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan finally whispered, "Mom?" I messed up. The words landed heavily between us. Not because they fixed anything, but because it was the first honest sentence he'd spoken in months. I stayed quiet, and maybe that silence forced him to keep talking. I should have stopped things earlier. "Yes," I answered calmly. He flinched slightly. "I know." I studied him carefully. His clothes looked wrinkled. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes. He'd lost weight, too. Stress was finally showing on him physically. Good. Not because I wanted him suffering, but because consequences are the only language denial eventually understands. Ethan sat heavily in the chair near the window. "She's angry all the time now," he admitted. I said nothing, because I already knew. Vanessa had lost her main advantage the moment I moved out voluntarily. The story she wanted to build that I was dependent and incapable was collapsing. And desperate people become volatile when plans fail. Ethan rubbed his face tiredly. "She keeps saying we're running out of time." There it was. Time, pressure, debt. "What exactly is happening financially?" I asked quietly. He stared at the floor. For a moment I thought he might lie again, then something inside him finally cracked. "My business loans defaulted months ago." I felt cold settle inside my chest. How much he swallowed hard. Around 230,000. I closed my eyes briefly. God. No wonder Vanessa was panicking. No wonder everything escalated so quickly. Ethan continued speaking in a flat, exhausted voice. "The consulting company failed last year. I tried hiding it because I thought I could recover. You lied to me." "I know." He looked physically sick saying it. But then credit cards got worse. Then legal notices started coming. Vanessa kept saying if we could just refinance or leverage the property that belongs to me. His face collapsed with shame. Yes. There it was. Finally. Truth without hiding behind softer language. Rain rattled the windows violently while silence stretched between us. Then Ethan whispered something that nearly broke my heart despite everything. I never thought she'd push this far. I stared at him carefully. "You let her." He looked down immediately. "Yes." God. That honesty hurt worse than excuses. Because deep down, I already knew. Vanessa was manipulative, but Ethan's silence had opened every door she walked through. I walked slowly toward the kitchenette and poured coffee into two chipped mugs. When I handed him one, his hands trembled slightly. I found Dad's letters, he said suddenly. I froze. What letters? The old box in the garage. My chest tightened immediately. Frank wrote letters constantly. Not emotional poetry. Practical things, advice, instructions, memories. After his stroke, I hadn't been able to read most of them again. Ethan stared into the coffee. There was one about the house. I sat across from him carefully. What did it say? His eyes filled slowly with tears. He wrote that the house was always supposed to protect you. My throat closed instantly. Ethan's voice cracked. He said if anything ever happened financially, you were never supposed to lose security because of our mistakes. There it was. Frank saw this possibility long before I ever did. Not the exact betrayal, but the danger of Ethan's weakness. I suddenly remembered one night years earlier, after Ethan lost money on a failed investment. Frank stood in our kitchen, shaking his head sadly. He confuses avoiding conflict with kindness, he told me quietly. One day, that's going to destroy something important. Back then, I defended our son immediately. Now I sat across from the ruins of that warning. Ethan wiped at his face roughly. She wants to sell the house. I stared at him. What? She's been talking to someone about market value. She thought once the paperwork was finalized, we could cash out pay debts and start over somewhere cheaper. The room felt suddenly airless, not because I was surprised anymore, because hearing it spoken aloud made everything real. All those months, all those manipulations, the fake concern, the pressure, the humiliation, it was all leading toward one thing: the house. My house. I looked at Ethan carefully. And when exactly were you planning to tell me? He broke completely then. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like a man collapsing inward after running out of lies. I don't know, he whispered. And somehow that answer felt more tragic than malicious. Because weakness destroys people precisely this way. One compromise at a time, one silence at a time. Until suddenly you're standing inside consequences you barely recognize. Ethan rubbed both hands over his face. Mom, I think Vanessa's scared. I almost laughed at that. Scared. Interesting word for someone who spent months emotionally cornering an older woman. But I also understood something painful. Fear probably did drive her. Debt, shame, failure, financial collapse. Those things rot people slowly from the inside. Still, fear explains behavior. It doesn't excuse cruelty. What happens now? Ethan asked quietly. I studied my son for a long moment before answering. The truth happens. He looked terrified immediately. Because truth is frightening when your entire life depends on denial. Before I could continue, Ethan's phone buzzed loudly. Vanessa. I saw panic flash across his face instantly. Answer it, I said calmly. He hesitated, then picked up. Hey! Even from across the table, I could hear Vanessa shouting through the speaker. Where are you at Mom's? A long pause. Then her voice turned sharp. You need to come home right now. I'm talking to her. No, Vanessa snapped. You're making this worse. I watched Ethan's face carefully as she continued talking rapidly. Then suddenly, I heard my own name. She's manipulating you emotionally again. Something inside me finally hardened completely. Manipulating him. After everything, Ethan closed his eyes tiredly. Vanessa, stop. No. You stop, she shouted. We're about to lose everything, and you're sitting there feeling guilty instead of fixing this. There it was. The truth. Not family, not concern, survival, money, panic. Ethan ended the call abruptly and stared at the dark screen in silence. Then he whispered something I never expected to hear from my son. I think I'm afraid of my own wife. The sadness of that sentence settled heavily through the room, because once upon a time, Ethan married Vanessa because he believed strong people would protect him. Instead, he'd handed his entire moral compass to someone driven by fear and ambition. Outside, thunder rolled across the lake, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized Vanessa Russell was finally losing control, which meant she was about to become far more dangerous. The family meeting happened 4 days later. Diane Mercer insisted we do everything formally. No emotional ambushes, she told me over the phone. No hallway confrontations. No private manipulation. We sit down together and we deal with facts. Facts. I clung to that word the entire drive back to the house. The house. Even thinking it now felt strange. Because for months, Vanessa had slowly conditioned me to feel like a guest there. An inconvenience, a temporary presence. And yet legally, financially, morally, it was still my home. Rain clouds hung low over Columbus that afternoon as Diane parked beside me in the driveway. She wore a charcoal gray suit and carried 2 leather folders beneath one arm. Calm, sharp, prepared. Exactly the opposite of how I felt. "You ready?" she asked gently. "No," but I nodded anyway. When we walked through the front door together, the tension hit instantly. Vanessa stood near the kitchen island in a cream sweater, arms folded tightly across her chest. Ethan lingered near the dining room, looking pale and exhausted. Lily sat quietly on the staircase, clutching her backpack, sensing something terrible was happening. Vanessa's eyes immediately narrowed when she saw Diane. "Oh," she said carefully. "You brought a lawyer." Diane smiled politely. "Good afternoon." The air inside the house felt brittle, like glass about to crack. Vanessa recovered quickly, forcing a light laugh. "Honestly, Jodi, this feels a little dramatic." There was that word again. Dramatic. I almost pitied her for still trying the same tactics. Diane calmly set her folders on the dining table. "I actually think clarity prevents drama." Vanessa's smile faded slightly. Nobody sat at first. We all just stood there inside years of buried resentment and silence. Finally, Diane gestured calmly. "Let's begin." Vanessa sat first, then Ethan. I noticed he still couldn't look directly at me for very long. Guilt had finally settled into him completely. Good. Not because I enjoyed his suffering, because guilt meant reality was breaking through denial. Diane opened the first folder carefully. "Mrs. Russell," she said calmly to Vanessa, "you recently presented Jodi with legal documents involving financial authority and residential property management." Vanessa immediately straightened. "It was just future planning." "No," Diane replied smoothly. "It was not." Silence dropped heavily across the room. Vanessa blinked. "I don't understand what you mean." Diane slid copies of the documents across the table. "These agreements establish pathways for property transfer authority under suggested diminished capacity." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Vanessa's voice sharpened immediately. "You're twisting this." "No," Diane said calmly. "I'm reading it accurately." God, watching someone refuse to bend under Vanessa's manipulation felt almost surreal. For months, I had questioned my own instincts constantly. Now someone was finally speaking plainly. Vanessa looked toward Ethan quickly. "Are we seriously doing this?" Ethan swallowed hard but said nothing. Again, always silence. Diane continued. "Before we move further, let's establish several facts clearly." She opened another folder. "The property located at this address is legally owned by Jodi Russell." Vanessa's jaw tightened instantly. Ethan stared at the table. Diane calmly placed certified copies of ownership documents down between us. Additionally, financial records show Jodi Russell personally prevented foreclosure on this property 3 years ago through direct financial intervention. More papers slid across the table. Bank transfers, mortgage payments, debt coverage. Months and months of quiet sacrifice laid out in black ink. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably for the first time. I watched her carefully. She looked angry now. Not confident. Not polished. Angry. Because facts destroy manipulation faster than emotion ever can. Diane continued speaking steadily. "Over the past 3 years, Jodi contributed substantial financial support toward this household, including mortgage stabilization, utilities, education expenses, transportation repairs, and medical costs. Each sentence hit Ethan harder visibly. His face kept collapsing further inward, like he was finally seeing his own life clearly for the first time. Vanessa suddenly laughed sharply. So what families help each other? The hypocrisy nearly stunned me. Families help each other. Interesting statement from the woman who told me to rent a room somewhere. Diane remained perfectly composed. Families do help each other, she agreed, which is why coercive financial restructuring becomes especially concerning. Vanessa's eyes flashed instantly. Coercive, yes. The words sat heavily in the room. Lily slowly crept farther down the staircase, listening silently. I hated that she was witnessing this, but perhaps truth was healthier than the lies she'd already been absorbing. Vanessa leaned forward aggressively now. No one coerced Jodi into anything. Diane folded her hands calmly. Then perhaps you can explain why copied financial documents were accessed without permission. Vanessa froze, only briefly, but long enough. Ethan looked up sharply. What I felt cold anger settled deeper inside me, because even now I wasn't fully sure how much Ethan truly knew. Vanessa recovered quickly. She's paranoid. Paranoid. There it was. The escalation Diane predicted. Once manipulation fails, they attack credibility. Diane simply slid photographs across the table. Pictures of my disturbed cedar chest, misplaced files, document copies, time-stamped evidence. Vanessa's face drained slightly of color. Ethan stared at the photographs in confusion. Vanessa? She cut him off instantly. Oh my God. Are you serious right now? We live together. Things get moved around. But even she sounded less convincing now, because truth was piling too high. Then Diane played the voicemail, the one Vanessa left after I moved out. We should really finish discussing the family paperwork situation. Some financial opportunities are time sensitive. The room went completely silent afterward. No one could hide from the greed inside those words anymore. Ethan looked physically ill. Vanessa immediately turned defensive. You don't understand the pressure we were under. There it is, Diane said quietly. Vanessa blinked. What pressure? For the first time, Diane's voice sharpened. Financial pressure does not justify manipulating an older woman into surrendering property control. Vanessa stood abruptly from her chair. This is unbelievable. No. What was unbelievable was how long I'd tolerated all of it. I finally spoke then, quietly, but clearly. You made me feel unwanted inside my own home. Vanessa looked at me sharply. You're exaggerating. No, I said calmly. You humiliated me publicly. You isolated me. You questioned my mental capacity, and you tried to pressure me into signing away control. Each sentence felt like removing a stone from my chest. Not emotional, not hysterical, just truth. Vanessa's composure finally cracked completely. You want to know the truth? She snapped suddenly. Fine. We were drowning. Ethan flinched. Vanessa's voice rose higher. Debt collectors calling constantly. Lawsuits coming, bills everywhere. And meanwhile, she's sitting on a fully paid property while we're suffocating. There it was. The real resentment. Not about family, not about boundaries. Entitlement. She believed my stability should become her rescue. I stared at her quietly. You could have asked for help honestly. Vanessa laughed bitterly. With what more pity money? That sentence hurt Ethan visibly, because deep down, he knew every sacrifice I made came from love. And somehow, both of them had twisted that love into obligation. Diane calmly closed one folder. This meeting is very simple. Jodi remains sole owner of this property. No transfer agreements will occur, and any further attempts at coercion or unauthorized financial access will be documented legally. Vanessa stared at her in disbelief, then at me, then finally at Ethan. And for the first time since all this began, I saw fear in her eyes, real fear, because the illusion of control was collapsing, slowly publicly, irreversibly. Ethan looked like he might fall apart entirely. He stared at the mountain of evidence spread across the table. Every payment, every sacrifice, every quiet act of protection I'd made for years. And I think my son finally realized something devastating. The woman he allowed to be treated like a burden had been the only reason they still had a home at all. The moment fear appeared in Vanessa's eyes, everything changed. Until then, she had controlled the emotional temperature in every room. She decided what was dramatic, what was confusion, what counted as concern. But now, the truth was bigger than her performance, and she knew it. The dining room had gone completely silent after Diane revealed the ownership records and financial history. Rain tapped steadily against the windows, while papers covered the table like evidence in a courtroom. Mortgage statements, transfer receipts, property filings, 3 years of sacrifice reduced to documents no one could emotionally twist anymore. Vanessa looked around wildly for control she no longer had. Then she found the only thing left: attack. "This is insane," she snapped suddenly. "You're acting like I committed a crime because I tried to protect my family financially." Diane stayed perfectly calm. "No one said crime. But that's clearly what you're implying." Vanessa's voice cracked sharply, now all polished politeness disappearing. "I was trying to save this family." "No," I said quietly. "You were trying to control it." She turned toward me immediately. "You have no idea what pressure we were under." I stared at her steadily. "You had enough pressure to humiliate me at dinner." Her face hardened instantly. "Oh my God. Are we really still talking about that? Still talking about that?" As if public humiliation should have expired by now. I noticed Lily sitting frozen halfway down the stairs, eyes wide with fear. That hurt most of all. Children should never have to watch adults destroy each other emotionally. Ethan finally looked toward his daughter. "Lily, sweetheart, maybe go upstairs for a little." "No," Vanessa snapped immediately. "She should hear this." The room froze again. Even Diane looked startled. Vanessa pointed toward me angrily. "She needs to understand what's actually happening instead of getting manipulated by guilt all the time." Manipulated. Again that word. Always projecting onto others what she herself had been doing. Lily looked terrified now. "Mom!" Vanessa ignored her completely. "She thinks Jodi's some helpless victim while we've been drowning financially for years." Ethan stood abruptly. "Stop." It wasn't loud, but it was the first time I'd heard him directly challenge her in months. Vanessa turned toward him in disbelief. "What I said, stop." The room went deathly still. I honestly think Vanessa was more shocked by that than the legal documents, because weak people only remain useful while they stay weak, and Ethan was finally standing upright. Barely, but still. Vanessa laughed sharply. "Oh, now you grow a backbone." Ethan flinched like she slapped him. That reaction alone told me how long this dynamic had been poisoning him. Diane quietly gathered several papers into a separate folder. "Mrs. Russell," she said calmly, "you accessed financial documentation without permission and attempted to create legal leverage tied to cognitive decline narratives." Vanessa rolled her eyes dramatically. "She's old. We were planning responsibly." My stomach turned. Old. Not Jodi. Not family. Just old. I watched Ethan's face carefully, and suddenly I realized something important. For the first time, he was hearing Vanessa clearly too. Not through excuses, not through fear. Clearly. "She's not incompetent," Ethan said quietly. Vanessa stared at him. "No one said she was. You implied it constantly." Her expression darkened instantly. "Because she forgets things." "So do you?" he snapped back. That surprised everyone, even him. The words seemed to escape before he could stop them. Vanessa looked stunned, then furious. "Wow." Ethan rubbed his face shakily. "No, listen to yourself. Everything became about controlling her, monitoring her, talking about future planning every single day. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly, because we were desperate. There it is again, Diane said quietly. Desperate. The real truth hiding beneath every manipulation. Vanessa pointed at the papers aggressively. You know what desperate feels like: collectors threatening lawsuits, losing sleep every night wondering if your child's house is going to disappear. My chest tightened slightly at Lily hearing this. But Vanessa kept going now like a dam had broken. And meanwhile, she sat there with full ownership. While we were barely breathing, I looked at her carefully. You never once asked me honestly for help. Because we were humiliated, Vanessa shouted. The room shook with the force of it. There it was. Not just greed, shame, humiliation, failure, all the things people bury until they rot into resentment. Vanessa's eyes suddenly filled with tears. Real ones this time. I was terrified, she whispered. For one brief moment, I almost softened, because fear does make people irrational. But then I remembered standing in that dining room while she told me to rent a room somewhere. I remembered the basement, the manipulation, the whispers, the legal documents. Fear explains behavior. It does not erase cruelty. Ethan looked shattered now. He slowly sank into a chair and stared at the table. Then suddenly he whispered something so quietly we almost missed it. I hated myself. Everyone looked at him. His voice trembled harder. Every time Mom paid another bill, every time she helped us again, I hated myself more. My throat closed instantly. Oh, Ethan. That was the missing piece. Not entitlement, not pure greed. Shame. He looked toward me, finally tears filling his eyes. I couldn't fix anything anymore. The room stayed silent except for rain outside. I kept thinking if I just stayed quiet long enough, maybe things would calm down, he continued shakily. But they kept getting worse, exactly like when he was 12 years old. Bullies at school. Head down. Stay quiet. Hope pain passes by itself. But pain never works that way. It grows in silence. Vanessa looked stunned listening to him. You're blaming me now? Ethan shook his head weakly. No, I'm blaming myself. That sentence changed something in the room, because accountability sounds different from guilt. Guilt cries. Accountability speaks plainly. He turned toward me fully then. Mom, you didn't deserve any of this. Tears burned my eyes instantly. Not because the words fixed anything, because they were true. And after months of being treated like a burden, hearing truth again felt almost unbearable. Vanessa suddenly stood again. Oh, please, she snapped bitterly. Now everyone gets to worship Saint Jodi, while I become the villain. Nobody answered. Because deep down, I think even she knew. This wasn't about one bad moment. It was about choices. Repeated choices. Cruel ones. Diane quietly opened another folder. There's one final matter. Vanessa looked exhausted now. What now? Diane slid printed emails across the table. My stomach tightened immediately. I recognized them. The ones Lily accidentally helped expose, Vanessa's private messages, search histories, property value estimates, draft conversations with a realtor, and worst of all, an email discussing potential post-transfer sale strategies for the house. Ethan stared at the pages in horror. What is this? Vanessa's face drained completely white. It's not what it looks like, but it was exactly what it looked like. A plan. A long-term plan. Sell the property, clear debts, start over, using my home, my safety, my trust. Ethan's breathing became ragged. You were going to sell the house? Vanessa panicked immediately. We needed options. You told me this was temporary planning. It was supposed to be? The room erupted into overlapping voices, but I barely heard any of it anymore, because suddenly I felt exhausted. Not angry, not shocked, just deeply, deeply tired. Tired of manipulation, tired of fear, tired of watching love get twisted into obligation and shame. Lily slowly walked down the final stair then. Silent tears streamed down her face, And in the middle of all the shouting, she whispered the saddest sentence of all. Why does everybody keep hurting Grandma? The entire room went silent instantly. Vanessa looked away first. Ethan broke completely. And I realized something devastating in that moment. Children always know who the safe person was all along. After Lily asked why everyone kept hurting me, no one spoke for several seconds. Not Vanessa, not Ethan, not even Diane. Because children have a brutal way of stripping adults down to truth. The rain outside had finally stopped, but inside the house, everything felt shattered beyond repair. Lily stood at the bottom of the staircase, crying quietly, clutching the railing with both hands. Ethan looked at his daughter like someone seeing consequences clearly for the first time. Vanessa, meanwhile, still seemed trapped inside survival mode. Panic, defensiveness, blame, anything except accountability. Finally, she exhaled sharply and rubbed both hands across her face. "Oh my God," she muttered bitterly. "I can't do this anymore." Then she looked directly at me. "You want honesty? Fine." Diane stayed perfectly still beside me. Vanessa pointed around the house angrily. "This place has been suffocating for years. Bills everywhere. Debt everywhere. Ethan shutting down every time I tried to fix things. And yes, I resented you." The admission hung heavily in the room, not because it shocked me anymore, because hearing resentment spoken aloud always feels uglier than sensing it quietly. Vanessa's eyes filled again. "You came into this house, and suddenly Ethan cared more about disappointing you than facing reality." I stared at her calmly. "That's not why you hated me." Her jaw tightened. "Yes, it was." "No," I said softly. "You hated me because I represented stability you couldn't control." That hit her hard. I could see it immediately. Because underneath all her anger lived one terrifying truth. I owned the one thing keeping her life from collapsing completely. The house. Vanessa laughed bitterly. "You think you're some innocent victim here?" I looked around slowly at the room, at the evidence still covering the table, at Ethan's broken expression, at Lily's tears, then back at Vanessa. "No," I answered quietly. "I think I'm a mother who loved too blindly." That silenced her for a moment, because even now I wasn't trying to destroy her, and I think part of her didn't know how to fight someone who refused to become cruel back. Ethan finally stood up slowly from his chair. His face looked older somehow, like guilt had physically aged him over the past hour. "Vanessa," he said quietly, "we crossed a line." She turned toward him in disbelief. Yes, we. That word mattered. Because for the first time, Ethan stopped hiding behind her decisions. He was finally admitting his own role. Vanessa stared at him like she barely recognized him. Then suddenly anger exploded across her face. "Oh, now you're brave," she snapped. "After I spent years holding everything together while you fell apart?" Ethan flinched again. That old reflex. But this time, he didn't retreat. "I know I failed," he said shakily. "But what we did to Mom was wrong." The room fell silent again. I watched my son carefully, and for the first time in years, I saw something unfamiliar in him. Courage, fragile, late, but real. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. "So what now? You just throw me under the bus so everybody forgives you." "No," Ethan whispered. "I'm trying to stop lying." That sentence hit harder than shouting ever could. Vanessa's expression crumbled briefly, before hardening again. "You think she's going to forgive you?" Ethan looked toward me then, not hopefully. Not entitled, just heartbroken. "I don't know," he admitted. "Good. Because forgiveness isn't something children automatically deserve simply because they finally tell the truth." I slowly stood from my chair. My knees ached slightly from tension and exhaustion, but my voice stayed calm. "I need both of you to listen carefully." No one interrupted. I spent most of my life believing love meant sacrifice. My eyes drifted toward Ethan, and maybe sometimes it does, then toward Vanessa. But sacrifice without boundaries becomes permission. The room stayed completely still. I let myself become smaller and smaller inside this family because I was afraid of losing it. Tears burned my eyes now, but I lost myself instead. Lily quietly walked toward me then and slipped her hand into mine. That nearly broke me completely. Vanessa looked away first. Maybe from guilt? Maybe from shame? Maybe simply because she couldn't stand watching genuine love anymore. I took a slow breath. I will not sign any documents. Vanessa immediately stiffened again, and I will not continue living inside manipulation and resentment. Her voice sharpened instantly. So what does that mean? I looked directly at her. It means things cannot continue the way they were. Ethan closed his eyes painfully because he already understood. The marriage was cracking open right in front of him. Vanessa stared at him desperately now. You're seriously choosing her over me? That question revealed everything. Not how do we fix this? Not how do we heal? Just who are you choosing? Ethan looked devastated. Then slowly, shakily, he answered, No, I'm choosing what's right for Lily. The silence afterward felt enormous. Vanessa blinked rapidly, like she'd been slapped. Lily squeezed my hand tighter, and I realized something tragic in that moment. Ethan had spent his entire life avoiding conflict because he feared losing love, but real love cannot survive cowardice forever. Vanessa laughed bitterly through tears. So that's it? No, Ethan whispered. This started long before today. He rubbed his face tiredly. I kept letting things happen because I was ashamed. Finally, the real truth again. Not greed, not hatred, shame. I felt like a failure, he admitted quietly. Every time Mom helped us financially, I hated myself more. His voice cracked. And instead of fixing myself, I hid behind you. Vanessa stared at him in stunned silence. Then suddenly something inside her collapsed too. Not gracefully, angrily. Oh, don't do this, she snapped. Don't suddenly act morally superior now. I'm not. Yes, you are. She pointed toward me furiously. She made you feel guilty every second she lived here. I shook my head slowly. No, Vanessa. Your own conscience did that. That hit harder than I intended. She looked genuinely wounded for the first time. Then her face hardened into something cold. Fine, she whispered. If everybody thinks I'm so terrible, maybe I should just leave. No one stopped her immediately. That seemed to shock her most of all, because manipulative people often expect panic when they threaten departure. Instead, there was only exhaustion. Vanessa looked at Ethan one final time. You'd really let me walk out. Ethan's eyes filled with tears again. I think you already left a long time ago. God, that sentence hurt everyone in the room, including me. Vanessa grabbed her purse violently from the counter. Lily flinched at the movement. I immediately pulled her slightly closer beside me. Vanessa noticed that, and I saw devastation flash across her face. Because in that instant, she realized something irreversible. She was no longer the safe person in her own child's eyes. Without another word, she walked toward the front door. But before leaving, she turned back once more. Not at Ethan, at me. And quietly, bitterly, she whispered, You won. I stared at her for a long moment, then answered with the only truth left. No, Vanessa. Everybody lost. She stood frozen for a second, then walked out into the cold evening air, slamming the door behind her hard enough to rattle the windows. Silence settled over the house afterward. Heavy, exhausted, final. Ethan sank slowly into a chair and covered his face with both hands. Lily climbed into my arms, crying quietly. And standing there in the middle of the house, I once thought I'd lost forever. I realized something painful but necessary. Love without respect eventually becomes grief. Vanessa did not come back that night, or the next one. At first, the house felt strangely hollow, without her constant presence moving through every room like tension wrapped in perfume and sharp words. But peace after chaos can feel unsettling too. like your body no longer trusts quiet. I stayed in the house only temporarily after she left. Not downstairs in the basement room, my room, the original guest room upstairs. Ethan had once prepared for me before everything turned bitter. The first night back inside it, I stood silently in the doorway for nearly 5 minutes. The floral curtains still hung beside the windows. The old framed family photos Lily placed on the dresser years earlier were still there too. Tiny reminders that once upon a time, love inside this house had been simple, before shame poisoned it. Ethan spent most of those first days barely speaking unless necessary. Not because he didn't want to, because guilt had finally settled into him fully. And guilt is heavy, especially when you can no longer escape it through silence. One morning I found him sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at unpaid bills spread across the counter. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the exhaustion carved into his face. He looked older than 41, older than Frank had looked at 50. Stress does that to people. So does cowardice. I made coffee, he said quietly when he noticed me. Thank you. I sat across from him carefully. Neither of us touched the bills. Finally, Ethan spoke. I started therapy. That surprised me. Not because therapy was shameful, because Ethan had spent his entire life avoiding discomfort at all costs. What made you decide that he gave a small, painful laugh? I realized I don't even understand why I let things get this bad. Honesty again. Fragile, uncomfortable, but honest. I spent years thinking avoiding conflict made me a good person, he admitted quietly. But really, I was just abandoning people emotionally whenever things got hard. The sentence hit me deeply because it was true. Not just about me, about himself too. Cowardice doesn't only hurt others, it destroys the coward slowly from the inside. Ethan rubbed his forehead tiredly. I don't expect forgiveness. Good. Because forgiveness demanded too quickly becomes another form of selfishness. I appreciate that, I said gently. He nodded. Then, after a long silence, he whispered something that nearly shattered me again. When Dad died, I think I panicked. I looked at him carefully. What do you mean he was always the strong one? Ethan swallowed hard. The responsible one. And after he was gone, I kept feeling like I had to become him overnight. My chest tightened. But instead of growing stronger, Ethan reached for the closest thing that felt powerful: Vanessa. And over time, he handed her more and more emotional control because he was terrified of failing. Ethan stared down at the table. Every time money got worse, I felt smaller. I suddenly remembered Frank's old warning again. Weak people sometimes become dangerous when stronger personalities guide them. Not because they're evil, because they surrender responsibility. I should have protected you, Ethan whispered. Tears burned my eyes instantly. Yes, I answered softly. You should have. He nodded slowly, accepting it without argument. That mattered more than apologies. Because accountability without defensiveness is rare. Lily adjusted better than anyone. Children often do once tension leaves a house. She laughed more again, slept through the night, started drawing pictures at the kitchen table without constantly glancing toward doorways first. One afternoon, she climbed beside me on the porch swing and asked quietly, Grandma, are you staying forever now? The question broke my heart, because I knew the answer already. No, sweetheart. Her face fell immediately, but why I brushed hair gently away from her forehead. Because sometimes loving people means creating healthier distance. She frowned thoughtfully. That sounds like a grown-up answer. I laughed softly for the first time in weeks. Probably. Truthfully, my decision had already been made days earlier. Not out of anger, out of clarity. I could not heal inside a house filled with too many painful memories. Not the humiliation, not the basement, not the silence at dinner tables, not the version of myself who kept shrinking to stay loved. So 3 days later, I sat down with Ethan and told him plainly, I'm selling the house. The shock on his face was immediate. What I've already spoken with Diane? His expression filled instantly with panic. You're kicking us out. There it was, fear, still rooted deeply inside him. I shook my head calmly. No, I'm ending a chapter. He stood abruptly. Mom, please don't do this because of me. It's not punishment. Then what is it? I looked around the kitchen slowly. At the walls that once held birthday decorations, Christmas mornings, Frank carving turkey every Thanksgiving, then later, whispers, manipulation, fear. This house stopped feeling like peace a long time ago. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. I can fix things. No, I said gently. You can fix yourself. That silence afterward felt important, because those were not the same thing. He sat back down slowly. What happens to us? That question used to control me. The fear of abandoning my child. But somewhere along this journey, I finally understood something. Adult children are not owed their parents' destruction in exchange for comfort. I'll give you time, I said calmly. You and Lily won't be thrown out suddenly. Relief flooded his face immediately. Then shame followed right behind it. Because even now, after everything, I was still protecting him. Not enabling him anymore, but protecting him humanely. There's a difference. Over the next month, things slowly changed inside the house. Ethan attended therapy twice a week. He started taking over finances himself instead of hiding from them. He sold unnecessary things, canceled expensive memberships, faced phone calls he'd spent years avoiding. It wasn't dramatic. No grand redemption speeches. Just painful adult responsibility finally arriving late. And strangely, that made me respect him more than any apology ever could. Vanessa sent several messages during that month. At first angry, then defensive, then eventually quiet. One evening, Ethan admitted she was staying with her sister in Cincinnati. Do you miss her? I asked carefully. He stared out the kitchen window for a long time before answering. I miss who I thought she was. God. That sentence carried so much grief inside it. But I also understood something painful. Vanessa probably once loved Ethan too, before fear and shame turned survival into manipulation. Life is rarely destroyed by one moment. Usually it erodes slowly through thousands of small choices. 2 months later, I found the little cottage near Lake Darby. White porch, blue shutters, a garden that needed work, and silence that felt peaceful instead of lonely. The moment I stepped inside, I knew. This was where the rest of my life would begin. Not as somebody's burden, not as somebody's financial solution, just Jodi Russell. And for the first time in years, that finally felt like enough. I moved into the cottage in early October. The morning I arrived, fog drifted softly across Lake Darby, while geese moved slowly over the water in quiet lines. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. The cottage wasn't large. One bedroom, a tiny kitchen with pale blue cabinets, an old wooden porch facing the lake, but every inch of it belonged to peace. My peace. I spent the first week unpacking slowly. Frank's watch went beside the bed. The cedar chest sat near the living room window. Family photographs lined the mantel carefully, though I noticed something surprising as I arranged them. I no longer felt the need to hide painful memories behind perfect ones. That changed everything. Healing, I discovered, isn't forgetting what happened. It's remembering honestly without letting it poison the rest of your life. The garden became my favorite project. The previous owner had neglected it badly, but underneath the weeds were beautiful things waiting patiently. Rose bushes, lavender, wild daisies near the fence. One afternoon while pulling weeds, I suddenly realized I was crying. Not from sadness, relief. Because for months I lived like someone apologizing for existing. Now I could breathe without shrinking first. Lily visited every weekend. The first time Ethan drove her to the cottage, he looked nervous standing at my front door. Not entitled, not defensive, just uncertain. That mattered. Real change usually sounds quieter than people expect. Lily ran straight past him and threw her arms around me immediately. Oh my gosh, Grandma, it smells like cinnamon in here. I laughed softly. I baked muffins? She grinned. It feels happy here. Children know. They always know. Ethan stood awkwardly near the porch while Lily explored the cottage excitedly. I can leave if you want, he said quietly. I studied him for a long moment. 6 months earlier, I might have rushed to comfort him, protected his feelings, made everything easier. But healing taught me something important. Love without boundaries becomes self-erasure. So instead, I answered honestly, you can stay for coffee. Not punishment, not full restoration either. Just truth. He nodded immediately. Okay. Inside the cottage kitchen, things felt gentler between us now. Still fragile, but honest. Ethan had changed physically over those months. Therapy helped. Responsibility helped more. He found stable work again, managing inventory for a regional supplier instead of chasing risky business ventures. He rented a modest townhouse closer to Lily's school. He stopped pretending appearances mattered more than reality, and perhaps most importantly, he finally learned how to tolerate discomfort without running from it. That changed him more than anything else. While Lily colored at the kitchen table, Ethan quietly handed me something folded from his jacket pocket. A letter. What's this? I asked carefully. He swallowed hard, something I needed to say properly. Later that evening, after they left, I sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, reading it slowly beneath the porch light. The letter wasn't dramatic. No grand speeches, no demands for forgiveness, just honesty. He admitted his shame, his cowardice, his fear of failure after Frank died, and one sentence stayed with me longer than all the others. I confused avoiding conflict with protecting people, but really, I was abandoning them. I read that line 3 times, because it was true. Not just about our family, about so many people. Silence feels harmless while it's happening, but silence often becomes betrayal later. Vanessa finalized the divorce the following spring. I only saw her one final time, unexpectedly. I was shopping for flower pots at a garden center outside Columbus when I noticed someone standing several aisles away staring at me. Vanessa. For one strange moment, neither of us moved. She looked thinner, tired, less polished somehow, like life had finally forced her to stop performing. Part of me expected anger, defensiveness. Instead, she walked slowly toward me. Hi, Jodi. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. Hello, Vanessa. Awkward silence settled between us. Then, unexpectedly, she looked down and whispered, I really was scared. I believed her. That was the tragic part. Fear had been real, but so had the cruelty. I know I answered quietly. Tears filled her eyes immediately. I don't think Ethan will ever forgive me. I thought about that carefully, then answered honestly. This isn't really about forgiveness anymore. She frowned slightly. What do you mean it's about whether we learn from who we became? That seemed to hit her hard. For several seconds, she simply stood there crying quietly in the middle of a garden center, surrounded by spring flowers. Then she whispered something I never expected. I think I stopped seeing people clearly, once survival became all I could think about. God. There it was. The truth underneath everything. Fear narrows people, turns love transactional, turns family into strategy. I nodded slowly. Fear can make people forget who they are. She wiped her eyes quickly. I'm sorry. The words came too late to repair the damage, but maybe not too late to matter. I gave her a small nod, then we walked away from each other quietly. No dramatic ending, no perfect reconciliation, just 2 women carrying different kinds of regret. By summer, the cottage garden finally bloomed fully. Lavender near the porch, white roses along the fence, sunflowers Lily planted herself beside the lake path. One evening, Ethan came over after work carrying lumber and tools. What's all this? I asked. He smiled awkwardly. You said the porch steps were loose. Together we repaired them, while sunset spread gold across the water. No heavy conversations, no emotional speeches, just work. Steady, honest. And somehow that healed more than words ever could. Before leaving that night, Ethan paused beside the porch railing. I know I don't deserve another chance automatically. I stayed quiet, but thank you, he whispered, for not giving up on me completely. I looked at my son carefully, then finally answered with the truth I learned too late in life. Loving someone doesn't mean protecting them from consequences. He nodded slowly. I know that now. And for the first time in many years, I believed him. A few months later, with Diane's help, I used part of the house sale money to create a small financial assistance fund for older women facing family coercion or financial manipulation. Nothing huge, just enough to help women pay for legal consultations, temporary housing, or emergency support. I named it after Frank because he saw danger before I ever did. Sometimes I sit on the porch at sunset, watching the lake turn gold while wind moves gently through the lavender, and I think about how close I came to disappearing inside someone else's fear. But I also think about this: growing older does not make you powerless. Being kind does not mean surrendering your dignity. And family should never require you to become smaller just to remain loved. Now, when Lily hugs me goodbye every Sunday evening, she always says the same thing before leaving. See you next weekend, Grandma. And every single time I smile and answer, I'll be right here. Because finally, I build a life no one can push me out of again. Sometimes the deepest heartbreak in life does not come from strangers. It comes from the people we once believed would always protect us. This story is not only about betrayal, money, or family conflict. It is about something many people quietly experience, but rarely talk about: the slow pain of becoming invisible inside your own family. Jodi spent years believing that love meant sacrifice. She kept giving, helping, forgiving, and staying silent because she thought that was what good mothers did. But one of the hardest lessons in life is realizing that love without boundaries can slowly destroy your dignity. When people become too comfortable with your kindness, they may eventually stop seeing your value altogether. But this story also reminds us of something powerful: it is never too late to reclaim yourself. Growing older does not mean becoming weak. Needing love does not mean surrendering your self-respect. And protecting your peace is not selfish, it is necessary. Ethan's story teaches another painful truth: silence can hurt people just as deeply as cruelty. Many people avoid conflict because they fear losing relationships, but avoiding truth often destroys those relationships anyway. Real courage is not pretending everything is fine. Real courage is speaking up before damage becomes irreversible, and even Vanessa's downfall carries a lesson. Fear and financial pressure can change people in dangerous ways if they stop seeing others as human beings and begin seeing them only as solutions to problems. But perhaps the most hopeful part of this story is that healing was still possible. Not perfect healing, not magical forgiveness. Real healing, slow, uncomfortable, honest, and built through actions instead of words. If this story touched your heart, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced betrayal, silence, or feeling unwanted by someone you loved? And what do you think was the saddest moment in Jodi's journey? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Your story may help someone else feel less alone tonight. And if you enjoy emotional family dramas with meaningful life lessons like this, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for spending this time with me. And wherever you are in the world tonight, I hope you remember this: you should never have to become smaller just to be loved.